Put that screaming baby in the overhead bin. Karen shouted, grabbing 6-month-old Tommy from his crying mother's arms. She didn't know the pilot listening over the intercom was Tommy's grandfather, or that her cruel act would be recorded and change all their lives forever. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The morning sun cast long shadows across Terminal B as passengers hurried toward Gate 27. Flight 447 to Denver was boarding, and among the crowd stood Margaret Thompson, clutching her boarding pass with white knuckles. As the self-appointed president of Willowbrook HOA, Margaret was used to being in control, used to having her way. What she wasn't used to was sitting in economy class. "This is absolutely ridiculous," she muttered to herself, adjusting her designer handbag. "I specifically requested first class. Don't they know who I am?" Behind her in line stood Sarah Mitchell, a young single mother holding her 6-month-old son Tommy. Dark circles under her eyes told the story of sleepless nights and endless worry. She was flying to Denver for her father's funeral, the only family she had left in the world. Sarah shifted Tommy to her other arm as he began to fuss. The baby had been crying on and off since they'd arrived at the airport 3 hours early. Sarah couldn't afford to miss this flight. She'd spent her last savings on these tickets. "Excuse me," Margaret's sharp voice cut through the boarding announcements. She had turned around to face Sarah. "That child has been crying nonstop. Some of us are trying to prepare for an important flight." Sarah's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. He's just tired and hungry. I'm trying to." "Well, try harder," Margaret snapped. "Not everyone wants to listen to that noise for 3 hours." The gate agent called for boarding and the line began to move. Sarah bounced Tommy gently, whispering soft words to calm him. But as they approached the aircraft door, Tommy's cries grew louder. Unknown to any of the passengers, Captain James Mitchell was completing his pre-flight checks in the cockpit. It had been 6 months since he'd seen his daughter Sarah or met his grandson Tommy. Work had kept him away, flying international routes that paid better but stole precious time with family. Today was supposed to be different. Today he was finally going to meet his grandson at his father-in-law's funeral. The irony wasn't lost on him, meeting new life at a celebration of a life well lived. As passengers settled into their seats, Margaret found herself in 12B middle seat, squeezed between a large man eating a tuna sandwich and a teenager with headphones. Her mood soured further when she spotted Sarah 3 rows behind her, still struggling with the crying baby. "Flight attendant," Margaret called out, her voice carrying across the cabin. Jessica, a veteran flight attendant with 20 years of experience, approached with a professional smile. "How can I help you, ma'am?" "That baby back there," Margaret pointed dramatically, "has been screaming since we boarded. This is unacceptable. I demand you do something about it." Jessica glanced back at Sarah, who was clearly doing her best to soothe Tommy. "I understand your concern, ma'am, but the mother seems to be managing the situation." "Managing?" Margaret's voice rose an octave. "That's what you call managing? I have important business in Denver. I can't arrive exhausted because of someone else's poor planning." Other passengers began to turn and stare. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as she heard every word. She buried her face in Tommy's soft hair, wishing she could disappear. "Ma'am, I'll see what I can do," Jessica said diplomatically, then walked back to Sarah. "How are you doing, honey?" Jessica asked quietly, crouching beside Sarah's seat. "I'm trying," Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. "He's usually such a good baby. I think the pressure changes are bothering his ears." Jessica noticed the funeral program sticking out of Sarah's purse. Her heart ached for this young mother traveling alone during such a difficult time. "Listen," Jessica said softly, "I have some tricks that might help. And don't worry about her," she nodded toward Margaret. "Some people forget we're all human." But Margaret wasn't done. As the plane taxied toward the runway, Tommy's cries intensified. The cabin pressure was indeed affecting his tiny ears, and nothing Sarah tried seemed to help. "This is ridiculous." Margaret unbuckled her seatbelt and marched down the aisle, ignoring the seatbelt sign. "Flight attendant, I demand you move me to first class immediately." "Ma'am, please return to your seat. We're about to take off," Jessica called out. "Not until you fix this situation." Margaret stood over Sarah, her face red with anger. "Some people shouldn't be allowed to travel with children if they can't control them." Sarah looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I'm doing everything I can. He's just a baby. I don't care." Margaret's voice echoed through the cabin. "This is disturbing other passengers. Maybe you should put him somewhere where we can't hear him." Like up there? She pointed wildly at the overhead bins. A collective gasp rose from nearby passengers. Even the man with the tuna sandwich looked shocked. "Ma'am, that's completely inappropriate," Jessica said firmly, moving to intervene. But Margaret was beyond reason. The stress of her HOA lawsuit, her recent divorce, and her financial troubles had been building for months. This crying baby had become the target for all her frustration. "I've had enough of this." In a moment of complete madness, Margaret reached for Tommy. "No!" Sarah cried out, holding her son tighter. But Margaret was stronger and more determined. In the struggle that followed, she managed to pull Tommy from his mother's arms. The baby's cries turned to screams of terror as Margaret lifted him toward the overhead compartment. "Ma'am, stop immediately." Jessica lunged forward, but Margaret had already opened the bin. In the cockpit, Captain Mitchell heard the commotion through the intercom. "What's happening back there?" he asked his co-pilot. "Sounds like a passenger disturbance. Should we return to the gate?" Before Captain Mitchell could respond, Jessica's panicked voice came through the cabin phone. "Captain, we have an emergency. A passenger has placed an infant in the overhead bin." The blood drained from Captain Mitchell's face. An infant. His mind immediately went to his daughter and grandson who were supposed to be on this flight. Full stop. "Return to gate immediately," he ordered his co-pilot, then unbuckled his harness. "You have the aircraft." Back in the cabin, chaos had erupted. Passengers were shouting, some trying to help, others filming with their phones. Tommy's terrified screams echoed from the overhead bin while Sarah fought desperately to reach him. "Get him down. Get my baby down." Sarah sobbed, clawing at Margaret, who was now blocking access to the bin. "He'll be quiet up there," Margaret said, her voice eerily calm. Problem solved. Two male passengers finally intervened, physically restraining Margaret while Jessica quickly opened the bin and carefully lifted the screaming infant out. "Tommy? Oh God, Tommy." Sarah reached for her son, checking every inch of him for injuries. Miraculously, he seemed physically unharmed, though clearly traumatized. The cockpit door burst open and Captain Mitchell strode into the cabin, still wearing his captain's hat. His eyes immediately found the commotion and locked onto the young woman holding a crying baby. "Sarah?" he whispered, his voice barely audible above the noise. Sarah looked up, her tear-stained face breaking into shock and relief. "Dad." The cabin fell silent except for Tommy's gradually subsiding cries. Captain Mitchell stared at his daughter, then at the tiny grandson he was meeting for the first time under these horrific circumstances. That's my grandson," he said quietly, his voice carrying to every corner of the now silent aircraft. Margaret, still being restrained by passengers, suddenly understood the magnitude of what she had done. The color drained from her face as she realized she had just assaulted the captain's family. I didn't know," she stammered. Captain Mitchell walked slowly down the aisle, his captain's uniform commanding respect and attention. Every eye was on him as he approached his daughter and grandson. When he reached them, he gently took Tommy in his arms. The baby immediately began to calm, seeming to sense safety in his grandfather's strong arms. Captain Mitchell looked down at his grandson for the first time, and tears began to stream down his weathered face. "Hello, little man," he whispered. "I'm your grandpa." Sarah collapsed against her father's shoulder, 6 months of single motherhood, grief, and stress finally overwhelming her. "Dad, I was so scared." She put him in the bin. She put my baby in the overhead bin. The cabin remained eerily quiet as passengers witnessed this intimate family moment born from trauma. Captain Mitchell held both his daughter and grandson, providing the strength Sarah had been missing for so long. He then turned to face Margaret, who was now sobbing and shaking with the realization of what she had done. "Ma'am," his voice was controlled but filled with barely contained emotion, "you put my 6-month-old grandson in an overhead bin." An infant, a helpless baby who was simply having trouble with the cabin pressure. Margaret tried to speak but no words came. The full weight of her actions crashed down on her like a tsunami. "Do you have children, ma'am?" Captain Mitchell asked. Margaret nodded weakly. Two daughters." "And how would you feel if someone took your babies and put them in an overhead bin because they were crying?" The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Margaret's sobs grew louder as she imagined her own daughters in Tommy's place. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Oh God, I'm so sorry. I don't know what came over me. I've been under so much stress with the HOA and my divorce but that's no excuse. There's no excuse for what I did." Captain Mitchell studied her face, seeing not just anger and entitlement, but a broken woman who had let her circumstances turn her into someone she never thought she could become. Airport security is already on their way, he said quietly. You'll be arrested for child endangerment and assault. But more than that, you'll have to live with what you did today for the rest of your life. The aircraft door opened and airport security, along with paramedics and police, boarded the plane. Tommy was checked by paramedics while Margaret was read her rights and led away in handcuffs. As she passed Captain Mitchell, she stopped. "I'm sorry," she said again, her voice breaking. Please tell your daughter I'm sorry. I'm not a bad person. I lost myself." Captain Mitchell looked at her for a long moment. "Ma'am, we all face stress and hardship. But how we handle it defines who we are. Today you chose to hurt an innocent child. That's something you'll need to reconcile with yourself." After the authorities left with Margaret, Captain Mitchell made an announcement to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to the incident we've just experienced, this flight will be delayed while we complete necessary reports and ensure the safety and well-being of all passengers. I want to thank those of you who stepped in to help protect my grandson." He paused, his voice becoming more personal. "What happened today was unthinkable. But it also showed me something beautiful, that when faced with cruelty, most people will choose kindness. Thank you for protecting my family." The cabin erupted in applause. Passengers who had been strangers an hour ago now felt bonded by shared experience and humanity. An elderly woman approached Sarah. "Honey, I raised 4 children. If that baby gets fussy again, you just hand him to me. We're all family up here." A businessman offered his first-class seat to Sarah. "A mother and baby shouldn't have to worry about leg room," he said with a gentle smile. The teenager with headphones approached shyly. I have some baby videos on my phone that always make my little sister laugh. Maybe they'd help." As the flight finally took off 2 hours later, Captain Mitchell made one more announcement. "Folks, this is your captain. We're now cruising at 35,000 feet. I want you to know that my grandson Tommy is doing well and is currently being spoiled by about half the passengers and coach." Laughter rippled through the cabin. "This flight has reminded me of something important. We're all traveling through life together, facing turbulence, delays, and unexpected challenges. We can choose to let those difficulties make us bitter and cruel, or we can choose compassion and understanding. The woman who endangered my grandson today isn't evil. She's broken. And maybe, if we're honest, we've all had moments where stress and pain made us forget our humanity. The difference is, most of us don't let it go that far." Sarah, now sitting in first class with Tommy sleeping peacefully in her arms, listened to her father's words with pride. She had always known he was a good man, but today she saw the depth of his character. "We're going to Denver to say goodbye to someone very special," Captain Mitchell continued, his voice thick with emotion. "My daughter Sarah is traveling to her grandfather's funeral. Tommy will meet his great-grandfather through stories and memories. It's a sad journey, but today has reminded me that even in our darkest moments, there's light to be found in human kindness." As the plane flew through the afternoon sky, Tommy slept soundly, surrounded by a cabin full of strangers who had become protectors. Sarah finally allowed herself to rest, knowing she wasn't alone. 3 hours later, as they began their descent into Denver, Captain Mitchell received word that Margaret Thompson had been charged with child endangerment, assault, and disrupting a commercial flight. She faced up to 5 years in prison. But more than legal consequences, Margaret faced something harder: the knowledge that her actions had been recorded and would follow her forever. The HOA lawsuit that had stressed her so much seemed insignificant now compared to what she had done to an innocent child. In her jail cell that night, Margaret replayed the scene over and over. She thought about Tommy's terrified screams, Sarah's desperate pleas, and Captain Mitchell's controlled anger. She thought about her own daughters and how she would feel if someone had done this to them. For the first time in months, Margaret stopped thinking about her own problems and started thinking about the pain she had caused others. It was the beginning of a long journey toward understanding who she had become and who she wanted to be. Meanwhile, at the Denver airport, Captain Mitchell finally got to properly meet his grandson. As he held Tommy in the bright terminal, passengers from the flight stopped to check on them. Phone numbers were exchanged and genuine friendships were born from shared trauma. "Dad," Sarah said as they waited for their bags, "I'm sorry it took something like this for us to be together." Captain Mitchell kissed his daughter's forehead. "Sarah, I'm the one who's sorry. I let work keep me away from the most important things in my life. That changes now." Tommy gurgled happily in his grandfather's arms, blissfully unaware that he had been at the center of an event that would be talked about for years to come. The funeral the next day was beautiful. Sarah's grandfather would have loved knowing that his great-grandson's first meeting with his grandfather had despite its traumatic beginning, brought the family closer together. As Captain Mitchell delivered the eulogy, he spoke about legacy and the kind of person we choose to be in difficult moments. Many in the congregation had already heard about the airplane incident on the news. "My father-in-law was a man who always chose kindness," Captain Mitchell said. "Even when life was hard, even when people disappointed him, he chose to see the good in humanity. Yesterday, I saw that same spirit in a plane full of strangers who stepped up to protect my grandson. That's the legacy worth leaving." 6 months later, Captain Mitchell had taken a position that kept him closer to home. He spent every Friday with Tommy, and Sarah had enrolled in nursing school with her father's support. Margaret Thompson served 8 months in jail and 2 years of probation. She lost her position as HOA president and faced a civil lawsuit from Sarah's family. But perhaps more importantly, she began therapy and community service, working to understand how her pain had manifested as cruelty toward others. On the anniversary of the flight, Margaret wrote a letter to Sarah. "Dear Sarah, I know no apology can undo what I did to you and Tommy that day. There is no excuse for putting an innocent child in danger because of my own stress and frustration. I think about that day every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. I want you to know that I'm working to become a better person. I'm in therapy, I'm volunteering with children's charities, and I'm trying to understand how I let my problems turn me into someone I never thought I could become. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that your son's safety and trauma haunt me, and I will spend the rest of my life trying to make amends for what I did. I hope Tommy is thriving and that he never remembers that terrible day. I hope you found peace despite what I put you through. Sincerely, Margaret Thompson." Sarah never responded to the letter, but she kept it. Someday when Tommy was older, she would tell him about the day strangers became heroes and how even in our worst moments, we can choose to do better. Captain Mitchell framed a photo from that day, not of the chaos, but of the moment afterward when the entire plane came together to support his family. It sits on his desk now, a reminder that turbulence is temporary, but the choice to show kindness in crisis is what truly defines us. The story of Flight 447 became more than just a news headline. It became a reminder that we all face storms in life, but how we weather them, and how we treat others during their storms, reveals who we really are. Tommy grew up surrounded by love, never knowing how close he came to tragedy that day. But he grew up hearing stories about the day a plane full of strangers became family, and how his grandfather's calm strength had guided them all through the turbulence. And sometimes, late at night when Tommy couldn't sleep, his grandfather would hold him close and tell him the most important lesson from that day. We all have overhead bins in our lives, Tommy, places where we stuff away our fears, our anger, our pain. But we must never, ever put our humanity up there. We must never let our troubles make us forget that everyone deserves compassion, especially the most vulnerable among us. The flight that began with cruelty ended with the strongest bonds of family and community. It was a reminder that even our darkest moments can become the foundation for our greatest growth, and that love, in the end, always finds a way to lift us higher than any plane ever could. Years later, when Tommy took his first solo flight as a young man, the flight attendant noticed his last name on the passenger manifest. "Mitchell? Any relation to Captain James Mitchell?" Tommy smiled. "He's my grandfather. Your grandfather is a legend in this industry. The way he handled that situation, well, it changed how we all think about passenger care and family." As Tommy settled into his seat, he thought about the story he'd heard so many times. He didn't remember that day, but he remembered every lesson it had taught his family about strength, forgiveness, and the power of choosing love over anger. The plane took off smoothly, carrying Tommy toward his future, built on the foundation of a grandfather's love and a community's kindness that began in the most unlikely of circumstances, 35,000 feet above the ground, in a moment when humanity chose to soar.